We got new FTD data for NIO stock, and it seems to align perfectly with the stock price dropping to lows that we hadn't seen in years. Check this out. And I've magnified it so it's easier for you to see on screen. The right-hand side here, this is the most recent FTD data that we have. The FTDs are represented by the white lines, and this goes through April 11th. But if you'll note here, this is a 2 million level. So 4 consecutive trade days, we saw over 2 million shares of NIO stock that couldn't be located. So there could have been price suppression, naked shorting, some kind of manipulation of the stock. And at that same time, the stock price dipped to that low that we hadn't seen in years. I wanted to point that out. Here's the other thing. I've kept it on the ticker at the bottom of the screen, and I'll zoom out now so you can see the big picture, the full stock history for NIO stock with the FTDs. Stock price represented by the yellow and the white lines representing the FTDs. And obviously, I think it's pretty obvious this chart shows the absence of the FTDs at the same time NIO stock went up. And in fact, it was only about 6 months where NIO went from $3.50 to over $55. But during that time, there were a few things that went on. One of them is the trade volume, which is why I've kept that at the bottom of the screen as one of the short-term indicators. The trade volume was much more elevated than what we've seen. So for example, in these recent days in April, there have been very few days where we've seen anywhere near 100 million shares traded on a single day. But if we go back during this time frame, there were a lot of days where we would see over 100 million shares traded, or even hundreds of millions of shares traded. And certainly in the recent year plus, we haven't seen a lot of those days. When we've seen the days with 100 million shares traded, it seems like those are days when NIO stock moves up and can move up aggressively. And that also seems to align or perhaps be an indicator that there could be manipulation of the stock going on, and perhaps this FTD data is representing some of that. And that's also why these elevated FTDs in this last year for NIO stock has been something I've been tracking and talking about here on the channel, because at that same time, you see the stock price being brought down. Interesting to note. And again, this is kind of big picture concept. And as sentiment shifts, which is one of the other indicators I've kept on the bottom of the screen, FTDs being the third, and I don't consider them in any order. I just think the first one, being trade volume on the daily side of things, is the easiest to track. For example, right now, just during the trade hours, only about 10 million shares have been traded for NIO. That's not a big number. And so it's not surprising to me to see the stock price down on the day, relatively speaking. And until or unless we see sentiment shift and perhaps even big volume come back, we may be stuck with these, price ranges or levels. In my most recent video, I had someone ask about when we could expect the $3 to $4 price range to change for NIO stock. And this was my response. NIO stock is hard to predict with timeframes. A few indicators I watch are shared below, and then I've got them here. Trade volume. And the example is 100 plus million shares traded in a day seems to align with the stock price going up. FTD numbers, elevated FTDs seem to influence the stock price going down. Lower trade volume plus elevated FTDs seems like it's easier for the price action to be controlled by shorts, especially to the downside, or maybe just seeing price action pinned within a trading range. Big money flow, I think, is likely to correlate with elevated volume, like the example of the 100 million shares or more traded in a single day. And that could come if we see an obvious reversal or new uptrend for NIO stock. And then Alibaba, or BABA is the ticker, maybe that's the easiest Chinese stock to track if it can be an indicator of big money flowing back to Chinese stocks. And I think Alibaba could go up quite a bit from where it is. So that's also one of the things I'm watching. And if NIO stock ends up seeing big money flow follow into it after Alibaba has a much bigger move up, that's something that we could again see reflected in the daily trade volume. So again, that's the shortest, kind of easiest thing to track in my mind. Sentiment, the news narrative, might be the easiest way to track this shifting, as we might start seeing consistent positive reports about NIO by lots of folks across a variety of media outlets, instead of kind of a mix of, kind of this good news, bad news, fear mongering versus, just a sprinkling of positive reporting or reports, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's a little bit of what I'm thinking and watching just with respect to the stock price. And it's short term with all of this stuff, and short term, can be defined, I guess, as different things for different people. In my case, I'm thinking in terms of just the last year plus what we've seen. Also, here's a teaser for you in case you haven't seen it. This is something that I shared, and I'll link it. It's CATL doing some promotion for NIO and the ET9, which is kind of cool. So I'll share this, which I retweeted on the old Twixter platform, So if you haven't seen it, you can check it out. But let me get this thing up and out. By the way, this is April 30th. As I record this, it's mid-morning here in the US. And so we just got this data that ran through April 11th for the FTDs. And I just thought it seemed to correlate too perfectly with the stock price going down to not talk about it and bring it up. So that's why I decided to just do one video and focus in on that. I got to come back with more content. There's a whole lot more to talk about. So have a great day. I'll see y'all again very soon.